Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. 18 minutes after the hour, the Sunrise Show on News Radio 880 KCMX. 50 degrees on its way up to 69 today. Beautiful Father's Day weekend. But I want to welcome onto the program Jonathan Blum. He's the digital skeptic, digitalskeptic.com. But he's put out all kinds of reports. He spends his life poring over details. And I sent him a copy of the Secretary of State for the Oregon's audit just released, and this biennial report and the audit report on counties, Oregon's counties 2016 financial condition review. But before we get to that, Jonathan, thanks so much for being on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm having a great time. We're out here on the East Coast. I'm getting ready to do a whole big news story on how to make $1 million in real estate. I'm doing a big map of where the best places to buy are right now. That's sort of the big project I'm working on now, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek and a lot of fun. So I'm learning a lot about real estate, and it was great that you sent me this report because I got to learn a little more.
Well, exactly right. And we had you on back in May, the best places to build a career and a life, and Benton County, Oregon, stuck out as having the most graduate degrees. That just was 3 times, wasn't it?
Yeah.
3 times the amount of other counties in Oregon. You're on to find out. We had a great time with that. And then you even just posted this graph about coffee in America. Talk about that. This is hysterical, actually.
Oh, yeah. It turns out that guess how many total coffee shops there are in the world?
Oh,
roughly.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
40,000, roughly, right?
Oh,
of those 40,000 globally, how many of them are in North America? It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Of the 40,000 coffee shops in the world. And
yes,
you've got to figure Starbucks and everything else.
Starbucks, Pete's, Dunkin's, sum them all up. How many?
I would say,
America?
30,000 of the 40?
Isn't it amazing, 30,000? So use about 32.
Oh,
so
gosh.
If you go to India, there's all of 240 in India, there's 32,000 in North America and Canada. It's hilarious.
India
and that's actually going to be a fun map that we're going to map up, and I guess that's going to go up on MSN sometime soon.
Yeah, and I didn't get to, I got to retweet it on our Twitter page, but here's the thing, India doesn't have 1 billion people or something like that?
1.2 billion people and 243 coffee shops. It's a tea culture, and there's a dramatic cultural shift there. There's a lot of backstory, but still the numbers are stark. We are a country of coffee junkies.
Well, I guess what you should do, to be fair, is then go to tea shops around the world, and that would be something else. But anyway,
exactly.
Well, thanks to Howard Schultz and Starbucks, and we've got Dutch Bros out here, which that's a whole other story, the drive-through coffee phenomenon. So, and then, fast forwarding to this, where to buy, this is pretty interesting, the hot spots in the country. And we talked about this death of the rural county. It's very evident in Oregon. The jobs are not being replaced. Values of land, obviously. So you tie that into what you're seeing of hot spots to buy property. What did you find on that?
Well, what was interesting about what you turned me on to was how powerful federal policy can be in rural parts of the country and not just in Oregon. The centralized government plays an enormous role in value of property all across the country. And once you become aware of that, it's a real driver. And so the question I always wanted to ask, or I would like to ask you is, have you ever sort of teamed up in the Northwest with other more land-oriented interests in other parts of the country? Has that coalition ever come together where the farmers, the people who use land in different ways and are very much under the direct management of the federal government, has there ever been sort of a collaboration there or a coalition there? To try to organize things?
Jonathan, I think it would be along the lines of like the farm bureaus and things. I don't think that we really get that. I know that there's a western region, and we have western interstate region with the counties at the county level, but that's general county business, not so much landowners or ranching or farming or land-based that and of course, like you said, governmental, because they would feel the thumbprint, the boot print, the thumb pressure of federal, whether it's subsidies, right, for farming or ranching, water rights.
Right. If you make a map, and I started to rough this together, and you can imagine this in your mind, of the parcels of land in the United States that really are affected directly by federal control.
Wow.
And, these are essentially not the urban centers where there's enormous local government with funding and power to control their own destinies. You get to a pretty big map. Seriously.
That would be something because there's subsidies, right? I mean, farmers are literally paid not to grow.
As are people who live in floodplains, as are people who have mining rights, as are people who have cattle rights, and each regional part of the country that uses the land in a different way has to develop their own rules on how to cooperate on that land. And when that happens, the feds get involved. And it'd be very interesting to see if there's sort of like a rural coalition. And, as we're in a time when our sort of party boundaries are being redrawn, I'm sort of wondering whether all of you all can sort of get organized. Because at least geographically, and that was certainly what was happening in this report, the pressures that are being felt are very widespread. And at least in geographic terms, almost overwhelming.
Yeah,
really tiny pockets that are thriving.
Well, yeah, and you could even do a historical study of where it was 100 years ago. Pressure from the federal government wouldn't have been that much, and then as it's increased, and you could probably show with the growth of the federal government and the pressure of the federal government. Oh boy, that would get sticky, huh?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because what you turned me on to was just how dramatic the change in Oregon was since the 80s when they rejiggered these timber rules. And when these rules change, they change. And so I'm studying up in the Northeast in Maine. And I know this sounds a little tangential, to be kind, but it turns out that the northeastern lobster fishing fleet is actually regulated as an extension of the Farm Bureau. And those fishermen are actually regulated in the same way that the timber industry is, in a screwy kind of way.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see how when those rules change, literally the catch will drop off in 4 months. It's really an instant thing. And it's a very interesting thing to look at geographically. So that's what I've been getting into.
Those are amazing stats, and of course, once again, pushing all that through. Jonathan, we have to get to a break, but let's come right back and talk about this Oregon auditor report came out of the Secretary of State, and what they're doing is looking at the counties, the four, I don't even want to call them bottom feeders, but the counties that are they're marked under distress anyway. Pardon my pun on the other thing, but we've got Jonathan Blum with us. He's Jonathan Blum. He's the digital skeptic, thedigitalskeptic.com, and he does some incredible work, and we can't wait to get back on. So let's get to a break and come right back. More on the Sunrise Show after this. Morning, everyone. 35 minutes after the hour, we're continuing with Jonathan Blum. He's the digital skeptic out of New York, and he's been featured on ABC News, CNBC, and Fortune Small Business and Entrepreneur Magazine. He's got a book coming out at the end of the year. He hasn't got it quite worked out yet, but we'll talk to him more as that goes. And he put out a report, The Best Places to Build a Career and Life. And actually, Benton County, Oregon came out. And then we just talked this last segment about coffee shops in America, or around the world, actually. 40,000 coffee shops around the world. America has 32,000 of them. And what was it, Jonathan? How many coffee shops in India? 200 and what?
243 in all of India. Now, obviously, India is a tea culture, and there's a whole cultural backstory there, so there's a lot of reasons for it. But still, it's a very striking story as to what a nation of, caffeine addicts we've become.
Well, yeah, and here's the next thing. Isn't coffee the number 3 commodity in the world?
The coffee economy not only creates a level of wealth, it is a trade and logistics not nightmare, but sort of a miracle. I
Yeah.
mean, the amount of sheer bulk material that moves essentially from the southern hemisphere north, it's really fascinating to watch. But it is, it's right up there with the oil industry.
Amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I sent to you this Secretary of State audit report from the state of Oregon that came out, and it's called the Oregon County's 2016 Financial Condition Review. And Jonathan, talk to our listeners about what you found in that.
Well, what's interesting about a report like this, and I'm going to have to bring out my data journalist soapbox here, is our government does a really crummy job of putting information out in a way where the public can actually analyze it fairly. And so what they tend to do is they release these things in the so-called PDF format. That's Adobe's portable document format.
Right.
And you'll see it, it's the little red square. It's not the little W, which is a Word file. And what happens in PDF formats are there's enormous limitations as to what you can do with the data in those documents. And for example, in this, there's really very good information here on per capita income and debt levels and tax rates, all the stuff you really want to see by county. They're in really nice graphics. The problem is they're presented in this PDF format as still locked photos. So a journalist like me can't get a hold of it quickly, put it up on a map, and start analyzing why things are happening. We're really forced to wrestle with these documents and guess. And that is just an endless source of frustration in trying to really analyze these documents. And I think it's really, and a lot of my colleagues agree, it really isn't what our tax dollars should be going towards, is to putting out public information in a way where the public can't easily digest.
Right, so it's a disservice, and if you want to put it on a, geographically, that way you would see, it would overlay over the top of geographic, demographic areas, interstates, waterways, mountain ranges, right?
All of these questions, and here, let's just go right to the first chart. This is the one that jumps out at you. Local revenue per capita, which is really money, right? It's money, people, and jobs. That's really what the story of geography is always about.
Right.
Money, people, and jobs. Okay, so what's the money here? Local revenue per capita, Josephine County, $181 per person over the 5-year average. You go down to the bottom in Sherman, which is up in the northwest, and it's $8,454 per person. Now, obviously, there's a backstory there. You
there's
probably have a wealthy community. It's relatively unpopulated. There has to be a story for that, right? The problem is that you can't get into that information quickly to analyze why those things are happening, and you just have to kind of accept the government's take on why that story is what it is. You can't study it easily, and that's the problem there.
Yeah, exactly. And then this next chart with property tax rates, it's interesting that the state, they do identify, because Josephine County has the lowest at 59 cents per thousand, and then once again, Sherman, who we just showed at $8,000, $8,400 per capita per person, is now $8.71 per thousand, which is, we can't even imagine the type of tax rate. But here's the crazy part. The state illustrated, they sidelined it, says Josephine County lowest permanent tax rate, 62% of its area in non-taxable federal lands generated the least amount of local revenues. So they're acknowledging that the federal issue is huge.
Correct. And I would argue, I would imagine that what's going on in Wheeler and Sherman is so much of the land is off limits to development. There's probably a very affluent community there that are very small. You probably have very few individuals. Each one of them has to shoulder an enormous part of the tax burden in order to keep the government functioning, and that's why those counties are taxed at such a higher rate. But again, you can't explore that because you can't put the information up quickly and compare them to a Yamhill or a Washington or a Benton, where you guys are, where probably the median price values are a lot closer to the real story in Oregon. And that's the problem with these reports.
And then they have the guts to go into the timber revenue dependence, that on page 9, that percentage of governmental fund revenue. And once again, Josephine County is the leader. Douglas is 15.5%, but Josephine, and the monies, and then it's you
see how trapped these counties are, and what a transition they're going to have to face. And there really is a Detroit-like story here that doesn't make the national headlines. You are looking at this secular shift away from a certain type of industry, and you just don't get the national recognition that, oh, wow, we really got to be more aware of how we step away from these type of central macroeconomic choices. And I'm as an East Coaster, I can tell you this debate does not pop up on the radar out here.
No. Now there was one crazy story that I got to tell you. We're almost out of time, but it's just enough time. So the story popped up on Bill O'Reilly because there was in Josephine County, which is one of the counties we're talking about. They don't have full coverage of the Josephine County Sheriff's Office. They've cut it way back. At some point, they had a sheriff and a couple of deputies, but they were working during the week and they were done at 5. The burden of law enforcement in the county would fall upon Oregon State Police. Well, one of the calls came in, and it was a 911 call, and a young lady, she'd had problems with her boyfriend. They were ex, and he came over to the house, pulled up in the driveway, and she was afraid. Her car was in the garage. She couldn't get out, so she calls 911, and the operator, which is recorded, and it was played on the Bill O'Reilly show, national news, because she was saying, this guy is trying to break into the house, and the operator says, well, can you tell him, I don't have anybody, can you tell him to go away? The next law enforcement official I have would be about 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And this is recorded, and the boyfriend breaks into the house, ends up raping her. Of course, he's caught, convicted, sent to jail. And this story is...
It is, go on the public safety spending per capita, which is, I think, on page 15 of this report. There is a wide shift. Polk County, $165, and Gilliam and Sherman, they get $1,000 per capita. So these resources are not being distributed equally. They're just not. And the 911 network is particularly vulnerable. It really is.
And so it was kind of like Bill O'Reilly at the time, and I happened to it just happened to pop out at me. I don't know. I was walking through, and he said, "What is this like? 1850s America, where everyone's going to have to protect themselves?" And actually, that's what's happened. The residents in Josephine County, they lack the confidence that the sheriff's office can protect them, and they're on their own, and that's how they feel over there.
Interesting. Well, anyway, the key is these reports are worth reading. They're worth scanning through. It's good to get a feeling for these numbers, and it'll be very interesting to see how these rural counties can organize around this debate, because there really is something to this.
I know it, and
I'm important thing.
And I'm trying to rally support from senators and House representatives nationally to see that, because what's really happened, Jonathan, is that the Endangered Species Act, that the spotted owl shut down all the timber and just systematically pushed all of the economy, the economic engine just pushed it right off the cliff, and just now it's hardly even existing right now. So.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think this data really confirms that.
It does.
But it's certainly worth the read, and it's been so interesting to learn, how this works in the Northwest, and just how powerful these forces are across the lands in the United States. It's really been very interesting for
Very good.
I appreciate the outreach.
Well, it's great. Jonathan Blum, ladies and gentlemen, he's the Digital Skeptic, digitalskeptic.com, and he's on Twitter as Digital Skeptic, and does all kinds of things, researcher, and he's been featured on many stories. He's got a book coming out end of the year. We'll have to follow him as that goes on, and Benton County, Oregon popped up on his most recent research project. Where are the best places to build a career and a life? And what I'll do is, I had posted up on our Facebook page, Jonathan, but I'll put that back up for any of our listeners who wants to get.
Yeah, I will, and actually, I'll repost that story too, and I'll put up the original demographic information that shows how regulators struggle seeing what you do, and that's really the story I can keep telling you guys, is they just don't see. They really are struggling to understand what's going on here, and the demographics really belie kind of this deeper, pernicious problem you guys face, and that's a shame.
It is. It really is. But, Jonathan, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Absolutely. Always fun to talk with you.
Great. Have a great weekend, sir. Thanks so much.
See you later.
All right. All right. We'll be back more in the Sunrise Show. News Radio 880 KCMX. Sunrise with Craig will return. You can find us on the web, kcmxam.com. And like I was just telling Jonathan, we'll post this up on our Facebook page, Sunrise on KCMX. Just type in Sunrise. In fact, our Twitter page and our Facebook page titled the same, Sunrise on KCMX. So all our links are right there on our webpage as well. News Radio 880 KCMX. We'll be right back. More on the Sunrise Show after this.